Hi, hello. Yeah, so hello. Yeah, we haven't done another one of these for a while, so a couple of months. But looking through some old, excuse me, some old IMVU projects that need to be finished. But now that we have the toolkit available, what do we do with our old projects that were built using the old or legacy starter files? So all of these starter files that were created because we didn't have a toolkit. So if we made something in one of those, how would we go about transferring the data from our old projects into IMVU so that we can use the toolkit? Hang on, just checking something. Because it's been a while. I've been doing other things with OBS. Just double check that. Yeah, that's working. That's fine. Just making sure the audio is coming through. Right, so yes. So we've got these. Whoops. Where's that audio coming from? Oh, there we go. Too many screens to keep an eye on. Right, yes, so old projects made using the old legacy starter files. How do we transfer or get our data, old data, into the toolkit? So there are a couple of ways we can do this. So again, we're using 2.93, which is the most compatible with the toolkit. So doing this, we will get differing, well, the results will differ depending what it is that we're doing. So we've just got two instances of Blender open. Toolkit. So there's the toolkit. And of course we are transferring across some clothing stuff, which is basically just the thing that's highlighted, this unfinished toilet paper wrap from, well, a couple of years ago. So we want clothing tool. Just make sure that that's selected, otherwise the tool doesn't appear. Append clothing file. That brings in the avatar. So we want to change this to the female default. So we're changing the gender. So these two are obviously the new, the new versions, or the updated versions. So female. That's the female avatar. So what we can try first is just select the mesh or meshes that we want to copy across. And literally object, copy objects. And then in the one that we want to drop this into, object, paste object. And we can see it, but it's absolutely massive because the legacy starter files were scaled to be relative to the original max files, which are 100 times larger than Blender's defaults. So we can see our mesh. So what we want to do here is scale it. Let's try this. View. Make sure our mesh is selected. Item. Oh, it's already scaled, so did we scale it in there? Yes, we did. So to make this work properly, relatively speaking, what we want to do is make sure that the meshes that we are copying across are reset to so their scale reads as 1 for each of the X, Y, and Z axes, because this obviously makes it easier to do the calculations, because we're not always going to get uniform scaling on our projects. So select our mesh, object, apply, rotation, scale. Rotation, scale. So now let's delete that. Do that again. So select, object, copy objects, object, paste object. So now we should find, select our mesh, so it's 1.0. So where's the origin point? So there again, there's another issue that we need to sort out. We need to make sure that the origin point is at the avatar's feet, otherwise we're going to get issues when we start scaling this. So this is essentially some basic prep that we need to do. So get rid of that. So we're going to change the location of the cursor. We can change its rotation as well. So it needs to be at the feet. So 0, 0, 0. So it's now down here. Just change that. Although that's optional. Then we need to reposition the origin. So object, set origin, and we want that to 3D cursor. Cursor, because what this does, so let's just undo that. Because what we want to do, if we rescale this, it's scaling the mesh relative to the origin point. So to make this easier to scale relative to the entire avatar, we want to adjust the origin point so it's down at the avatar's feet, where the origin points are all the other mesh sections of the avatar. So to make sure that, well, not make sure, to make the process easier of scaling, we want to replicate that. So change the location, 0, 0, 0, rotation optional, an object, set origin, 3D cursor. So now, object, copy, object, paste. So now with our object selected, we have the origin down at the avatar's feet, which now makes this next step easy to do. Okay, so this will be 0. Whoops, so it's 0.0, 0.01, 0.01, 0.01, and there we have, yoink. So it's the astute amongst you may have noticed that the values that we used are the same as we used to have to use for the exporter when we were exporting to FBX in the legacy files, because we're scaling down our object. And that was 0.01 when we were exporting to FBX. So we use the same measurements. So let's just save this file, save as. This is I can find it. Oh, there it is. 7, so we want 8. So now we can minimize that, full screen that, and we have our object usable, although we can't do it just yet. It's usable relative to the toolkit's avatar. So let's just finish off, see if we can get this finished. Now, if I remember correctly, we were going to do something where we're going to curl loop around these sections, but I can't remember how. It was 2 years ago. Working on this 2 years ago. Which is crazy. So, edit mode. Face select. Let's just detach this because it'll be easier to just extrude this how we want it. Oops. Instead of trying to, because I think, if I remember correctly, it was just extruded down on the inside, and then I'm going to do something or other down at the bottom here. So rather than trying to pull the existing mesh up and form it the way that we want to, it's easy just to trim it off, just get rid of it, either delete it or just move it out of the way, and then just extrude the bits that we need and form that roughly. So that's what we're doing. Whoops. So we extrude the rough shape. Extrude down there. Extrude. Right, so we're going to stop there because that'll get confusing. Good old vertex manipulation. Good job trying to make sense of that. Lines everywhere. So what we're trying to, well, what we're trying to do here is just create an impression of scrunched up blue paper. So it's scrunched up to accommodate this second loop. So this has to be scrunched out of the way. A loop cut there. Whoops. Okay, so I made some sense out of that. Oh, so the other way that got carried away there. Hang on, let's do this. Let's just save this file. Save as. So the other way. It's the wrong one. That one. The other way that we could have done the data transfer. Let's just new. Studio Toolkit, clothing, email. So the other way we could have done this, so after we've done the prep, we'll need to save the file, save a version, don't save over the, so let's just call it 7B. The other way we could have done this is file, append, we're in the wrong place. Oh yeah, it's the right place. Find the file. 7B. There's 7B, so double click. Object. What was it called? Oh, plane. That's that one. Don't need that. Okay, so select and just append. That'll bring in the mesh. And of course we've prepped it, so the origin is where it needs to be. Then all we need to do is item, same again, 0.01, 0.01, 0.01. And there it is in place. So we can either just copy it directly from one instance of Blender into another, or once we've saved the file, we can append it. So file, append, and bring it in. So that's the other way we could have done that. So let's go back to let's save, minimize. So it's just basically just vertex pushing. And I need to put, whoops. I mean, you can't see it from the outside, but that accommodates the curvature of the butt. Just putting that in there. We want to try as best as we can to accommodate the mesh structure that exists. So this edge loop that's on the outside, well, on a different part of the, we want to try and accommodate that in other sections of the mesh so that it deforms as a unit, essentially, as a subsection. Otherwise, what we end up with, if we don't accommodate these sorts of correspondences, that's not the right word, but if we don't accommodate these, so that's that edge loop, we get clipping, or we will get clipping when we weight this and then watch it animate with the avatar. So we have to structure our meshes in a way that we are accommodating existing structure. So as well as the fact that we are shaping our mesh, we're doing so and trying to create a loose correspondence across the mesh so it deforms correctly. Otherwise we're just going to get clipping. You know, when the avatar crosses its legs or does anything, it'll cause significant clipping. So we have to make sure that we accommodate that. But it can be tricky. So it can mean that we end up putting more structure in than we might otherwise have needed to describe the shape that we're shaping. But as you can see, we're trying to replicate the structure of this main ribbon in these sections that we're adding. Because again, if we don't, it'll cause issues later on. Let's get rid of this piece that we didn't need. Faces, because it's getting in the way. Extrude, shrink, extrude, whoops. So of course, something like this is going to be a nightmare to weight paint. Because ordinarily you want to be making your items, roughly replicate the avatar structure. And obviously this is the default, so if we were to use the updated female, we've got a bit more structure that we can play around with in terms of what we have to match in order to get our item to articulate and deform correctly without clipping too much through the mesh. And this is one of the reasons why for these kinds of things that we leave a reasonable amount of space between the item and the avatar, and we make up for that difference by creative what's the word? Creative accommodation. That's not quite the right way to put it, but we're doing something a little bit more creative, to accommodate the way that the clothing avatar don't match. Whoops. Because if we wanted to be accurate, we could use, let me see if I can link up to it. We could use cloth simulation, but that would essentially be too accurate, if you can be too accurate, which can look a little odd. So we need to add a loop cut. So that one roughly accommodates this loop, and this one, this loop, and obviously this one, this loop. Yeah, we might have to come back to this and see if we can finish it off in another stream. Because as always, these things are a lot more complicated to sort out because we're problem solving basically. We're trying to solve a set of problems as they crop up whilst we are meshing. So let's just go to textured mode. That looks okay. Yeah, so if you wanted greater accuracy, you would use the cloth simulation. But doing that in Blender is tricky for this kind of thing, this kind of product or project, because it's pure physics simulation. And you have to use pinning, you have to pin certain parts of the mesh in place in order for it to conform to the shape that we might want it to take. Otherwise, it won't. So we have to do that, so that. Yeah, so do another video extruding this and doing something down here, and then seeing how much of a nightmare this is going to be to white paint. Because it will. This will be a nightmare. Because basically it's not just the structure that we are having to replicate. Let's just go back here. It's not just the structure. So generally speaking, the avatar structure is constructed in a grid like this. It's in triangular format in the toolkit just because the original meshes were just broken down into triangles to make it easier for exporting and all that sort of stuff. But in Max and the original files, the original legacy toolkit files, the legacy files, we can see this gridded structure for the avatar. But when you do things like this, we're not following the grid per se, we're going non-axial to it. So what that means is that you are now trying to weight non-axial shapes or form structure to an axial structure. So weight painting won't necessarily be the issue in terms of creating values, the colored values. Painting those to the mesh won't be the issue. The issue will be trying to get the mesh to deform. Whoops. Trying to get the mesh to deform so that it doesn't collapse on itself, because we have used so many non-axial structural elements on a axial mesh. So basically it's like trying to put a triangle in a round hole, or a square, what is it, square peg in a round hole essentially. But so this is going to be interesting, but we've got the back done, that's all right. Might have to do a bit more interesting things with the front, but we'll see. Right, so we'll save that there. Version save. Number 10. And we'll call it quits until the next stream, which will be whenever that is. So thanks for lurking, lurkers, and thanks for watching this after the fact. We've got to do some content to keep YouTube happy, because as some of the more astute of you may have noticed, everybody's views are down. So we've got to keep, I think it's probably due to Google's predominant use of their AI algorithm. It's affecting people's content, and that's notwithstanding the subscription throttling that occurs. That whenever you release a video, it only goes out to a certain number of people. It doesn't go out to all subscribers. It just goes out to a certain percentage of users that social media deems to be worthy of receipt of the new content. Whatever decision they use to make that, whatever criteria they use to make that decision, is anyone's guess, but it affects content production. But anyway, that's another discussion that can be had elsewhere or at another time. So we'll see you on the next video. So bye for now.